Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Give everyone a second to get settled, and then we'll head right into our presentation today. So good afternoon, and welcome to IFTA's webinar with our IFTA Allied Select member, SKYSHEEP. For those who don't know me, my name is Carolyn Muller, and I am the Director of Member Learning Programs here at IFTA. And so we're excited to have on a great topic today and have our allied member with us. But before we start the presentation, I have a few housekeeping items I just want to mention to everyone. You'll notice that you're muted, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate today. So if you have a question for our presenter, please use the question function, which is located 2/3 of the way down the webinar dashboard control. You can either enter your question at any time during the presentation, so we can get to as many questions as possible once we're done. I'll also note that we're recording today's webinar, and it will be posted to the webinar section of our website in a few days. So if you like the presentation and want to share it with other folks in your organization, please feel free to do so. And last but not least, because today's topic does talk a little bit about pricing, I just want to remind everyone of IFTA's antitrust policy. We'll go ahead and post that in the chat if you're not familiar with it, but essentially it just wants to make sure that we're not getting too in the weeds of discussing pricing and things of that nature. So with that, we're excited to introduce today Dallas Crawford. Dallas is a passionate advocate for leveraging cutting-edge solutions to empower businesses and unlock hidden profit potential. As the co-founder of SKYSHEEP, he specializes in guiding clients through the implementation of data-driven strategies to maximize their revenue and margin opportunity via optimizing pricing strategies. So Dallas, we're excited to have you, and we'll hand things over to you.
Thank you. And really excited to be connecting with everyone today here virtually. We will jump right in shortly, but just one thing to hit on to piggyback on what Carolyn said. If you're like me, a question pops into your head and 3 minutes later you may forget it. So my favorite tactic is to just go ahead and type them in as they come to your brain. Feel free to put them in there, and then we will do our best to get to and through all of them. At the conclusion, we'll try to leave adequate time for that. But as Carolyn mentioned, today is all about unlocking hidden profit. So much of, and not just profit, but also revenue opportunity as well. It's all about growth. And a lot of times we don't realize how much power is there to be harnessed in our own existing data sets. So a lot of what we want to talk about today is leveraging what you already have, potentially with additional augmentation, but really, really harnessing and uncovering the power of information that lies within your four walls. So with that said, a quick introduction of who SKYSHEEP is, since we may be new to some of you. We've only been a part of the IFTA community for a couple years now. We are a select sponsor, as Carolyn mentioned, but we've been around since 2021. And really, we're founded by a group of practitioners. So hopefully that'll shine through as we talk to you. But we are a software company, a software as a solution, software as a service provider, but we are very much grounded in what practically works in the real world, and all development, all of the science that goes into the platforms we deliver is all grounded in what's been effective in this industry. So one thing I want to hit on from that bottom piece is we are food service dedicated. Several of your member organizations are customer of ours, several non-members are customers of ours, but we are 100% dedicated to this industry, which I think gives us unique insight and just kind of a familiarity that kind of bleeds through as we work with our clients. But enough about us. We want to make most of today about how you can go and execute on some of the things that we often do yourselves, or at least start that process. And of course, if you decide to engage us for further discussions, we'd be happy to do that. But Let's dig into your current macro environment. All of our customers are dealing with a few key things, but one is rising OpEx, right? So this is an example of Fred data on the producer price index, meaning what most distributors have to pay. And you can see coming out of the unfortunate pandemic, we were finally starting to trail down as last year started, last calendar year. Last July was fairly low, but you can see July of this year, when you drill into all foods, so kind of make it more general, is already up 4.3% year over year, which is the biggest jump in quite a while in terms of pure year over year numbers. So costs are rising underneath us. Labor is also a challenge for every distributor that we speak to. And so you've got to be able to manage these pressures, but your customers aren't getting any less demanding. When you talk about the levers that are within your control to manage that, what you see here is an excerpt from a McKinsey study in 2019. It may look very old, but promise you all this data is still relevant today. And what they really talk about in this study, with pricing as the most valuable value creation lever, is that a 1% price increase can have a 22% impact on EBITDA. You can't say that out loud enough times to really internalize it. More importantly, growing volume by almost 6% is equivalent, and that's while keeping OpEx flat, which we know is not a possibility. Growing volume by 6% would be equivalent to a 1% price increase. So when you talk about staying focused on levers you can control, this is really valuable insight into where, as a distributor, you may have a lot of flexibility to generate growth. If this was easy, we could pause this webinar, you could go out, you could adjust your prices, you could look to capture all this great EBITDA and margin in front of you, and this webinar would frankly be done. But we all know practically, if we've ever tried to implement price increases or decreases in order to drive volume, pricing is a huge, huge challenge, and it is certainly not something that you can tamper with, because the minute you lose trust and credibility with the operators you serve or the customers that you serve, you're in trouble. Let's talk about what makes it so difficult. First, you've got tons of items, tons of customers that individual reps, DSRs may have to manage. You've got commodities fluctuating all over the place in this industry. You've got varying rep tenure, so your more senior reps may be more adept at managing margin, or sometimes your junior reps are more sophisticated. But the challenge is that kind of moves all over the place within your organization. You lack a lot of consistency, and then that's compounded by any geographic diversity and kind of competitive pressures that you face within the markets you serve. In order to tackle that, what we traditionally see is a model like this. So whether you use brackets, matrices, zones, however you refer to them, what our distributors often have to do is come up with a one-to-many price, right? So if you look at this kind of dotted line, and you can see price per cases on this y-axis, and just individual customers making a decision are here on the x-axis. In order to manage the amount of complexity that we just talked about, costs moving all over the place, thousands of items, thousands of customers, you kind of have to group them as best you can and come up with a price that fits all. But we all know that value and the way we determine value is very different. Some of your customers, for example, may be willing to pay up to $64. And so you lost this sale because you weren't priced in an area where they were tolerable, but you were very close. You were marginally away from where they needed you to be, if they shopped you against another distributor. Some other operators that may be buying from you for reasons other than price could potentially tolerate higher prices to varying degrees, right? $1 here, $3 there. And so it's really, really important to try to maximize the accuracy of your pricing and to optimize your pricing to kind of manage this. None of these things are easy, though, because you also have a ton of inflection points you've got to deal with. So we talked about market volatility and costs, underlying costs for these commodities constantly changing, as we saw in that first slide. But then you can compound that with shifts in the industry, channel preferences changing. I don't order directly from my rep or my DSR anymore. I may be placing orders myself. I may be calling them in, or very likely doing them on a digital channel. You've got to balance your own internal initiatives, right? You've got revenue growth goals. You've got new markets you want to expand into. And while you do all of this, while you go for growth and you manage these new accounts, you've also got to retain customers and make sure you're not charging too much and charging risky amounts for individual things. One last thing to mention in the macro is if you look at the IFTA distributor technology report, which was pretty interesting from the end of last year, 92% of you have an e-commerce solution in place. And that number is growing rapidly. We don't work with any distributors that don't have some form of online ordering for their customers. And if you offer self-shopping, which the vast majority of them do as well, your pricing challenge just multiplied tenfold, because you have to be able to price every item for every customer, because at any time they can go and search for that item. So again, complexity is not going down, it's going up. You kind of lose the rep as your buffer. And by the way, this is a quote from a DSR interview that we did, or a territory sales rep, but they flat out told us when they're pricing new items, they have no clue where they need to be. So they're either asking the operator, or at best, they're going to take some manual time to go and review where they are on that item in other accounts. Not the best use of their time. You want them sampling new product with their customers. You want them expanding their business. If they've got a pinch in on delivery, you want them doing everything to serve their customers and everything but manual work that they're not even sure of anyway. And so the only answer to that is price optimization, right? So a price optimization solution, and the term solution does not mean software. Yes, we sell software in this domain, but a price optimization solution, which you may be capable of yourself, really leverages data-driven models to make optimized pricing decisions at the customer and item specific level. So if you go back in your mind to the zones brackets being kind of a one-to-many, this is leveraging the data that you have at your disposal to truly treat every customer. You know, the analogy we like to use is picture, your top pricing person, if you have internal pricing resources or revenue management resources, or just your top rep who really understands pricing, really knows how to maximize both revenue and margin in their territory. Imagine if you could extrapolate, clone that person, have a million of them to manage every single combination as if it was their most critical customer, that most critical item. That's what this does. And that's how you unlock your ability to manage pricing and that powerful lever that we talked about. Optimization is not new, right? So this is literally from US Foods earnings call a few weeks ago, where they said that gross profit is up. It was a celebratory call. They had improved cost of goods sold through some other balancing, but more importantly, they referenced price optimization in their earnings report. And this is only called out to make sure you know two things. One, it's a proven concept in the industry, but more importantly, your larger competitors, because they are not the size of the average IFTA distributor. Your larger competitors are doing this every day, and they are tuned by account, by item. And so in order to remain competitive and maintain your footprint, your position, and more importantly, grow it, you've got to stay ahead of the curve and stay on target, right? And again, just to kind of boil all these down, manual processes are really challenging for your reps to manage and your organization to manage. There's no way your reps can touch their, bottom 50 to 100 items in every account. Aligning to your strategic objectives is very challenging in a manual pricing process. And even if it's automated, if it's not data driven, you've got these rising expenses, you've got online ordering and shifts in channels, you lose that rep buffer, and you've got the volatility. So that's kind of a summary of the challenges you might be facing. Let's talk about how to solve those. Mention this at the top, but in order to capture this value, it is all about harnessing what's in your walls, meaning what's in your transactional data and within your existing sales history, right? So when you apply data to your pricing challenges, you're going to be able to glean customer and item specific insight. You're going to be able to really price. I can't emphasize this second bullet enough. Pricing based on proven market success. That means when you recommend a new price, you not only have confidence in it, but your DSRs or your reps can have confidence in it, because these are prices that you can already show based on transaction history that have been effective. And we'll talk about how you enhance that confidence even further. You can kind of read the rest of these, but retaining customers is equally important. We always tell our customers, you cannot grow margin while losing customers. So if prices are moved in a way that is counterproductive and you start losing customers, it is a net loss, right? So the important thing to do, again, is to tune these things, be constrained, but take nice data-driven measured decisions to try to capture that financial growth and reduce your risk and exposure. And we'll hit on all of these again later on. So how do we do it? First, let's talk about what you have at your disposal. In your existing data, you know how much your customers are buying, you know how they spend in different categories, you know what their average drop size is, you know how many drops they're doing per week overall, you know where they're located, you know if it's an urban or suburban area, you know how difficult it is to get deliveries to them. You also know from an item specific standpoint how much of an individual item they're buying. Is it a seasonal item? You know all these things. And then you know what segment they are, what type of capacity they have. And when you augment the things that you already have, you know, in your customer tables with the performance and transaction history, that's what's going to enable you to kind of find these growth opportunities. And the basics, if you were to walk away from this and say, you know, how do we leverage all those sources to do this? You kind of break it up into a few key things. One, you want to segment. I'm going to use a term in a second called a micro segment, but it's basically, think of your traditional segmentation and going many steps further to identify similar customers across as many shared attributes as possible. That is how you can find price opportunity at its lowest level. In addition to that, though, you want to analyze historical behavior for price sensitivity to make sure that just because you found a peer group that may look a certain way, there aren't other contextual reasons for why prices may be structured where they are. Because again, that's going to allow you to tune for growth. And then most importantly, you want to be responsive to all of your market drivers, changes in demand, changes in cost. You want to be responsible of those as they kind of go. So if you've got a lot of customers and you just plotted them on a map, it may look like this, something very unuseful, and your transaction history would look the same way if you weren't able to apply, you know, AI and machine learning or sophisticated data science steps to it. So the first thing you want to do is, again, look across all those attributes and build models across those attributes to establish these micro segments that I just referred to, right? And what you'll come to, again, within your own transaction history, right, when married with your customer information, you can now see that we have this group of 3 locations that are all 1.5 miles apart. And in a real scenario, these were being managed by different reps, but they're 1.5 miles apart, all similar types of restaurants, and they were mid-volume overall, but sirloin was their top item, right? Or in their top 5. So you can see I am a shameless lover of 80s basketball, so you can see Magic, Bird, and Irving here. But this Magic is their number 2 item. They bought 1,000 pounds in the last 3 weeks. Irving is their top item. And pretty much everything looks the same, right? Where they're geographically located, how much they buy overall, how much of this item they buy, how important this item is to them. Almost everything looks the same, except this Magic is commanding only a 4% margin. So right away, you can presume that you have opportunity here, right, in this Magic account. And if you were to sit with a rep and, the goal is to, again, build their confidence, you move out of a space where they can challenge you and say, oh, you don't understand my customer, you don't understand my business. There's so many unique things. You're showing them by virtue of this breakout, everything that they care about, every comparable variable that they might try to swat you back with is kind of laid out here, right? And so you can really isolate this, have more healthy, productive conversations about where to drive margin, right? So this is one way to do it, is to have these micro segments, build them out as granularly as possible of folks who behave similarly, and not aggregate, do they do more than 2,000 a week? Do they do more than 2 drops a week? But more sophisticated elements to break them out by, to really find people who behave similarly. So that's the first way you can identify price opportunity and move the needle in what we would call your active kind of run rate business day to day. You don't even have to go and grow. You have the opportunity to make a small price move here and there and go and get that. And that may seem like a very small thing. Okay, so what if we, bump that person up from 4% margin to 8% margin? An isolated move is small, but if you are selling to, thousands of items to thousands of customers, you can do the math on the number of combinations that you're actually selling. But ultimately, $3 here, $1,000 per month here really add up in aggregate, right? And that's what, all those nickels, dimes, and quarters come together. The most important thing, though, is to be constrained when you roll out any price increases, and to make sure that you prevent disruption. So just because that customer had the opportunity very clearly to move a significant way, if their peers are paying 20% margin, you probably shouldn't be at 4, but I can almost guarantee you that if you bump the price up to a 20% margin rate tomorrow for that account, you'd be on a one-way trip out of there. So it's about constraining these price moves, being patient to capture them. Don't try to capture it all over time. Try to do it at scale. Keep the impact low to your customers' overall order. And that will be the best way to slowly gather these gains over time. So that's really how you want to make progress in some of your run rate areas. Now let's talk about looking to expand the customer basket. So this is a sample of just a pizza place that would have been derived. And again, this is derived from the sales history. So in this case, you don't really have the item specific behavior, because this is an example where they're buying a lot of things. They're buying mozzarella cheese, onions, green peppers, mushrooms, things that you would normally see from a pizza parlor, but they aren't buying basil. And you know that 85% of their peers are, or those in their comparable segment, are buying basil, right? So you know that one of these things don't look alike, right? They should be buying basil. They very likely have a need for basil. And again, if you leverage models at scale to marry your transaction history with your customer tables by segment to say, okay, who's in this group? Who's in this micro segment? And what are the others in this group buying that this one isn't? That's really how you can start to identify product growth opportunities, and how you serve those recommendations up to your team are up to you. But whether you serve up recommendations or not, the practical price implications are really kind of laid out here. One of the first things you can do is simply price basil right. So we talked about that one-to-many price, and this is an example in this current price column, where if you've got standard margins that apply, let's say in your online or order entry tool, that aren't really well thought out, and so they've got either fairly aggressive or even average margins, right, across the board. But again, you know that most pizza places are buying basil, so you need to be more on the aggressive side, right? You don't want to just be priced somewhere in the middle, because they likely have a relationship with somebody that they're getting basil from. And if you look at how their peers, others in their segment, in that kind of cluster, how they're paying, you can see that the price difference between where their peers on average are transacting versus what's in, your default system can be very, very different. And you want to make sure that you price any basil, right? So if you're not selling one, let's make sure we're priced on all of these comparable items to win, right? Closer to that peer average. This is a small thing you can do to kind of allow yourself to be more prepared, especially if you allow self-shopping, or if a customer is off, maybe they buy everything but basil from you. One day they get frustrated, the quality isn't there, they're open, they take a look, you're in the right ballpark, you're showing them fresh product, and now you have a much higher probability of closing that new sale, or more importantly, you can surface these recommendations to your team. So that's kind of how you would expand your basket within existing accounts and grow the product and throughput that you're selling there, which again is another way to drive both revenue and profit. And you do it efficiently because you're already making deliveries and drops to these customers. So it's a really cost-effective way to do that. Going to dynamic pricing. Everybody in this industry knows that markets can fluctuate drastically. This is a produce item over here to the right. And what we typically see, and you would likely see if you kind of modeled out your data, is in low cost environments, you're going to manage margin more aggressively and be higher, right? So margin percent is here on the y-axis and costs are on the x. So in lower margin environments, you're going to manage it more aggressively. You're going to be looking to capture it. But as costs increase, oranges are running right now. Don't know if they still are, avocados. You want to be responsive to that. And your competitors are likely managing that pricing pressure for their operators. And so you've got to be doing the same. So in high cost environments, you tend to capture lower margins. You want to be able to execute this same type of strategy, because what you don't want to do is be locked in, right? If you look at these kind of dotted blue lines, you don't want to be locked in at a 35% margin on an $11 cost because you're out of whack with the market. The same way as you don't want to be locked in at an 18% margin at a $7 cost because you're significantly lagging the market. So you want to kind of leverage insights like this to make sure that you have healthy, consistent margins and that you avoid speeding, right, and running too hot and too fast in high cost environments, and avoid any margin erosion and forfeiting profits in low cost markets. And this is easy to do if you have a system and have time. But if you're managing this manually, you've got to check for, did things move up or down this week, week to week? You can't get to everything. And this is one of the reps' biggest frustrations when we talk to them. So that's a big way to drive improvement. And then arguably one of the most important, because whenever we talk to people about price opportunity and where they can find it, or we can help them find it, they get so excited about, ooh, I can kind of move the needle on these, capture this additional upside, and I'll be great. And you can if you do it right. But again, if you do it wrong and increase your risks, or if you don't identify risks that already exist within your customer base, you're going to have a really challenging time staying competitive, because your competitors, again, aren't stopping. They're investing in this domain, right? And so you want to be able to identify high-risk customers, meaning customers who are performing at a margin rate. This is kind of a histogram of transactions that are kind of happening at different varying margin rates. And you can see there's some buckets in here. This is kind of your normalized range. If you're transacting out here in this 22 to 24%, you are at the top end of the entire company. And then again, you have to look at these relative to a peer range, right? Because if you're buying a lot and it's a key item, your real high end of range for customers similar to you may be over here even further to the left. And so you want to mitigate risk and rein people in wherever you have the opportunity to do so. So you want to strategically lower prices if it's an important item to the customer, if it's high risk, or if someone is just speeding way out of bounds, regardless of if it's a top 10 item or even a lower tier item, but you don't want to get caught by your customer and hurt that trust, you need to catch things like this early and proactively respond to them. Making good time here. So one of the big things to consider is kind of the multitude of areas where getting this right can have such an additive value on your organization, right? So when you look at data-driven pricing and when you approach pricing as something to be guided by what's been proven, i.e. in the transactional data, so many people say, well, we need competitive insight. We need to know where our competitors are. If you are consistently transacting at healthy margins in a given rate, right? If you go back to that example we showed you, they're 1.5 miles from one another, so likely competition is comparable. They're buying comparable amounts. They are buying comparable amounts of that specific item. So they're buying comparable amounts overall and of that specific item. It's not too many more unique scenarios you can look for. So your competitive insight is actually built into your transaction history. You've just got to do the hard work to go and harness it and kind of extract this information, which again, we've touched on at a high level today. But when you do that right, you're going to enhance margin via those small constrained price changes. You're going to be able to expand and identify new item sales, right, across your existing account base. You're going to be able to be much more aligned as costs shift, and you're going to protect yourself in high risk scenarios. Again, whether you strategically decrease a core item to protect yourself, or if you're just reining in speeders. And kind of this view on the right, this is a sample of just 1 month of results for a small distributor, but it gives you a feel for how quickly this lift can be felt and the different things you can monitor for. So you want to always be measuring, right? If you roll out anything to influence pricing and drive revenue or drive margin, measure, 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 because people learn from successes. That's what this whole discussion has been about. So you want to know, have we had positive unit impact, positive margin impact, positive margin rate and margin per case impact? And if any of these are shaky, right, revisit it, tune your strategy, and make sure, again, that you're aligning what you're executing to your strategic goals. And the same thing, you want to monitor for won and lost product, right? If you're losing items in account, which is this little red sliver, versus gaining, which is this green, then you got a problem. And so just whatever you do, however you decide to approach this, make sure, one, that is additive, and two, that you are measuring as you go. Because nothing salespeople love more than definitive results. That is the easiest way to make them adopters. So let's talk about, this is the only selfish portion of this, and we'll be very, very brief. Any of the things we talked about today, you can tackle individually as a one-off. It takes some work. It would take some, a little bit of experience from your team in terms of, some of your great analysts to go and extract this information, but it could be done. I would say what makes us unique as, industry focused as we are, is being able to do this at scale. So being able to do everything that we talked about today systematically and at scale, right? So I'm not going to belabor this, but when you do it at scale and you automate it, it provides any of the results that you could achieve manually by attacking one of those areas. Imagine if you could attack all of them at the same time and leverage a system to treat every customer and item with the same level of specificity. That's what a system, a dynamic pricing system, whether you looked at us or someone else in the industry, that is where a system will come in and be really, really valuable. Sometimes people want to go off and validate some of these practices first, make sure that the value is there. Some people know right away, yeah, if we're going to do this right, we need to do it at scale to achieve all of these things the financial growth, improving confidence amongst your DSRs, and reducing that risk. But the most important thing, whether you do this at scale or not, is to make it data driven, in our opinion. It reduces a lot of subjectivity, it reduces a lot of emotion, and keeps people focused on practical outcomes. To show you how we often deliver to minimize sales disruption, but more importantly, again, if you were going to take this on by yourself, this is an example of a customer screenshot before we showed up. So if they pulled up an account for an individual item, they could see what their current price is, what the formula price is. So they have these formulas that they can set in this FM column. This is for them to override pricing, and they can see what cost basis they're on, right? So pretty simple, straightforward, and they could come in and either edit a formula or hand key a new price. They have a lot of autonomy. The goal is to avoid asking salespeople to do more, and certainly we don't want to ask them to change. Any of us on this call who've been through asking salespeople to change will laugh at that idea. So it's about keeping it simple and getting the right information to a system they need. So all this customer had to do to harness the power of these new, improved, data-driven prices was to integrate it with their existing ERP. And they really rolled out two key things. They rolled out this recommended price feature in the bottom so that a rep could see the recommended price. They overrode the price on the line with the recommended price, but reps could opt out either by hand keying a price or this new expiration date column that you see here. All they did was allow them to put in a future date. So pricing updated every week on Thursday. If they put in a date, I'm sorry, on Monday, if they put in a date Tuesday or further, then the recommended price wouldn't override what they did. So if they had some handshake agreement or an intentional loss leader that they set up, they put in a date here to insulate themselves, and voila. Most of these recommended prices made it to the line. Ones that didn't apply, reps knew better than to let that increase or decrease flow through. They managed it themselves, and the results were staggering, and they always are. So if you decide to tackle this problem on your own, just please focus on making it easy for your sales team to consume. The less you change in their life, the less impact they feel, the less impact your customers feel, right? So pretty simple integration with their ERP. And again, the results were staggering. 340 basis points, and that's annually. So massive improvement, reduced customer churn significantly by, again, bringing some consistency to how they manage costs, but also by reining in some speeders. And it was a complex environment, multiple warehouses that had to be integrated with, but none of that is important. What's really important is you can kind of achieve super, super powerful results with targeted, very focused efforts. So key takeaways, and then I'll pause for questions. Can't emphasize this first point enough. I think I already said that, so forgive me if this is recorded and that's the 5th time you've heard it, and definitely forgive me the live audience, but data-driven value. When it's guided by information that is already there that you can show and demonstrate to your team, conversations are much more streamlined and seamless. Focus on your strategic initiatives. So a lot of time pricing can get disconnected at a tactical and strategic level. So you may have everybody high saying, we want to grow margin. And maybe the immediate reaction, if you're a sales rep being pushed, is to just increase things across the board. Or if you want to grow volume, they go decrease things across the board when you need to be more tuned. So massage the tactics to make sure that they're always aligned with what your corporate strategy is, right? If there's a category that you want to see some growth in, then get aggressive and align your pricing tactics in that category to be more aggressive. If there's a new market you want to expand into, so make sure that there's alignment there. Minimize disruption. We just probably belabored this a little bit too much, but you've got to incorporate this stuff. You've got to meet users where they are and incorporate it in a way that minimizes their complexity. That's the fastest way to achieve acceptance and thus ROI. Moving on to ROI, this is one of the sneaky secrets of pricing. It impacts the top and bottom line immediately. If you change price by 10%, 10 cent, again, you have to be careful. You can't just decide to do that. It's got to be market aligned. It's got to be data driven. But if you raise it 10 cent, you've now made 10 cent on every pound or every case or whatever your unit of measure is that you're selling, right? So it is immediate. You can't stress that enough. And we've talked about this, but you want to avoid adverse outcomes. The fastest way to make a pricing project look negative is to shed product in accounts, right? So you have to be judicious and minimize risk as you roll these types of things out, which is why you have to be data driven at your core to attack them. So with that, I think we did a good job of leaving adequate time for questions, and I will take them as they come. But I really, really appreciate you all's time and welcome the opportunity to connect with you all at next month's, is it next month? Yeah, next month's Solutions Conference. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Wow, Dallas, that was a lot. That was a lot to take in, but fantastic information. And I love, keep it simple, but measure, right? And you showed us there at the end how, taking on those key strategies really made such an, dynamic impact for one business. So it was fantastic. So hey, looking at some of our questions, I'd love, you talked a lot about the DSR, right, and the pricing strategies and things like that. But when you're looking to implement a system like this, who are maybe some of the other key players within the organization that someone needs to engage for really successful implementation here?
Yeah, pricing is an interesting world. It has tentacles everywhere, right? So often your purchasing team and your buyers are setting costs. Sometimes they might be adjusting costs to, if they've made a good buy and the market is somewhere maybe higher, but they've made a great buy and your true costs are lower, they're going to want to protect that, right? And adjust that market. So you want to stay connected across the whole organization. You want purchasing at the table. You want finance at the table because oftentimes there are strategic initiatives that guide you. Sales has to either co-lead or lead in order for this to be successful. If this is something pushed at the sales team, you can have success. I don't want to say you can't. It is just more difficult than when they are engaged, have a voice in design and bought in. And then IT, right? We talked about it's important to meet the users where they are. So it's really, really important that when you talk about, hey, how can we make this easy? How can we integrate with our ERP? How can we integrate with our order entry system? And trust me, we've integrated with the most brittle systems in the world. I think you saw that one customer was on a green screen, and that's being polite of what to call it. So we can integrate with the most brittle things, but you've got to engage all of those teams. They don't have to be there every step of the way, but the more engaged at minimum and connected sales, finance, and purchasing are on the solution, and then kind of making sure that IT is not left behind so that you have the best technical solution to support what you strategically want to achieve. Hopefully that's helpful, but it has to be either field led or the field has to be a very informed participant.
Yep, no, great. That's great. I guess the other real question we all have is how long does, this really take from an implementation, right? There's the physical implementation, but I'm sure then there's some of that ongoing learning and process. And what does that typically look like?
Yeah, typically an implementation for us, which is very different than our competitors, is a few months. Really, could be 2.5 months to 3.5 to 4 months. It just depends on the environment. That's going to sound very fast versus most transformational projects, but a lot of that is because our solution specifically is purpose built for the industry, and a lot of things that you tackle this alone or work with others, you might be building from scratch. If you build these from scratch, you're probably looking at closer to a 6 to 12 month time frame, just depending on how deep you go and how many of those areas you tackle. But again, all doable.
Super. Well, super. Again, as we shared, this was fantastic information. I don't see that we have any additional questions, but as Dallas shared, he and his colleagues will be at IFTA Solutions next month. So for those of you who will be joining us there, we can't wait to see you all. And Dallas, thanks again for sharing some great content with us today.
Thank you. And yeah, if you want to reach out to customer service at skysheepdata.com, that is the fastest way to get a response. So our marketing team will pass those to our sales team, and we'll follow up shortly thereafter with any questions. All
Super.
right.
So we'll just remind everyone that's joined us today that we'll have a recording up on our website in just a couple of days. Be sure to be on the lookout for other upcoming IFTA webinars, and we appreciate you all attending today.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks.